Let's take a look at what's involved in adding a software as a service application to Azure Active Directory and using Azure Active Directory as the authentication provider for that application. Now, before we get started, it's important to note that every single application has a slightly different process because you've got to basically complete two ends. You've got to complete the Azure end, but then whoever provides that application, whether it's Google or Dropbox or Facebook or any one of the hundreds of available applications, you need an account with the application where you can now go in and configure their end of the authentication. But that being said, the general process is pretty straightforward. We're going to go into Azure AD and go into our enterprise applications. And from here, we'll click All Applications and then create a new application. 2,928 currently available applications across all manner of categories. So this represents all the different providers or different application tools that are out there that can integrate and use Azure Active Directory as their authentication provider. So we're just going to take some of these examples that are some of the most common, one of them being Box. So if we click on this, we can add it to Azure Active Directory. Now, once this is added, we've got to complete the configuration to make sure that both ends are correct and that we can authenticate Box users using Azure AD. With every one of these applications, there is a step-by-step tutorial. And the tutorial is going to tell you exactly what you've got to do on each end. So for most applications, the first couple of steps are going to be essentially identical here. We add the application, configure single sign-on, and then in the single sign-on, we're going to have different URLs and different providers based on the application that we're using. So we complete this process, and then eventually we get to the stage where we now have to go log on to the other half of the application and ensure that that half is complete. So, for example, let's take a look at Google. And we'll scroll down, just have a look at the Google tutorial. And so right here on the bottom, again, the first couple of steps you can see very, very similar. And then right here on the bottom, we log on to the Google admin console, go to the security area, and then set up single sign-on to use Azure as the sign-on provider. So again, this is going to vary from application to application. Here's DocuSign. Tutorials provided. First couple of steps, essentially the same. And then we go down and we need to log on to DocuSign and identify that DocuSign is using an identity provider and that Azure is in fact the identity provider. So you can now add any one of these applications and use Azure Active Directory as the authentication source for that application. So to kind of bring this scenario full circle, if you have an on-premises Active Directory domain, you can synchronize using Azure AD Connect to Azure Active Directory and now add all your software as a service providers to Azure Active Directory and essentially use your on-premises domain credentials to authenticate to software as a service applications such as Google Apps, Box, DocuSign, or any one of the other available applications in this directory. That'll let you use Azure Active Directory as the full central management point for all user access. Once these applications are added, you now get the added benefit of, just like these RD web applications that we set up in the previous demo, you can now control which users are allowed to use these applications. And for example, if you only have a certain number of licenses to, for example, Box, you can grant those licenses only to the appropriate users, set up additional requirements such as permissions or group membership requirements, and leverage all the power of Azure AD to now control which web-based software as a service applications specific users have access to.